What's up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of Processing Blue, where, yes, we process blue for you. I'm Alex Zietlow alongside Mike Kaye, who is, for some reason, reading a book if you're watching it on YouTube as I am getting this introduction. And we cover the Carolina Panthers for the Charlotte Observer. And Mike, today we're talking free agency. We're talking who the Panthers could go after in free agency. We're talking about which positions the Panthers should not attack in free agency. We're gonna discuss it all. But before we get to all that, how are you? How did the rest of your Indianapolis trip end up? Any extended stays at airports? And I guess, what are you reading?
Well, first, I did not have an extended stay, I should say. Actually, it might have been the quickest flight back with a layover I've ever had. I flew from Indianapolis to Chicago. I had like a 50-minute layover, which turned into like a 20-minute layover because obviously they had to board people. And I got there like 2 minutes before boarding. I was in group 5, didn't have to check anything. It was a lovely trip. I think that, being in Indianapolis for 5 days and kind of taking in everything, not only the conversations with Dan Morgan and Dave Canales, but talking to people around the league, and then also meeting some of these great prospects, it was a pretty worthwhile experience. I mean, this year there wasn't as much news as there typically is. Like, as if you remember, like in the previous years, Jerry Richardson passed away in the middle of the combine. Shaq Thompson was given his flowers and told, see you later last year. There's been stuff with stadium deals and ticket prices dropping. This was kind of more subdued, but it allowed you to get to more into the football and focus on the next few weeks.
Mhm.
Also, this is Little Brown Mouse. It came in my son's Happy Meal the other, and as we live in North Carolina, everybody has to deal with mice at some point. I'm just trying to, stay on their level and just like understand their thought process. This is called a forest book, and you can't see in my backyard, but whenever we've done the podcast in my backyard, you see that we have a heavy amount of trees. So we are basically like a welcome mat for little brown mice. Anyway, Alex, you left a day earlier. I ended up covering Hornets Pacers. Shout out to Xavier Tillman, who
Yeah,
is
which, by
4
the way,
4-0 when he plays at least a minute.
bro, Mike, by the way, if you're just gonna apply this bit, the Nick Samak bit, to every sport you covered, don't you think it'll lose its luster?
It's not a Nick Samak bit. It is a backup center bit. Like, once Nick Samak becomes a starter, he's pretty much like dead to humor. He got considered, a serious. I mean, he is a serious subject, but you know what I mean? Like, we've moved on. Like, you've got
Mhm.
to evolve. Anyway, that is a lot of a segue. Alex, what we got on tap today?
We are going to talk free agency, as I mentioned at the top of the show, with NFL Scouting Combine, with the NFL Scouting Combine behind us. Our eyes directly go to the veterans that the Panthers might want to pick up. Um, so just a quick, some things up top. Free agency officially begins when the new league year begins on March 11. But the good stuff, the negotiating period or whatever the NFL is calling it
Legal
these days.
tampering, which is the single, like, what does that even, I mean, that's like just such a dumb marriage of words. Anyway,
Yeah, well, I don't exactly know what that means, but whatever that is, that starts Monday morning, and that is when, all of your notifications are gonna be blowing up your phone for the next 3 days as you learn what this Panthers team is gonna look like, at least what the roster is gonna look like before the NFL draft in April. So, Mike, let's do this. I think it would be best if we go back and forth and pick some free agents that we think the Panthers would be smart to make a run at this week. There are obviously hundreds of them out there right now. Um, let's do 3 each, and let's start with you. You have talked a lot about, the free agents on the show, but today, let's hear an elevator pitch as to why your 3 will get them. Let's start with 1, kick it to me 1, and so on. So who is your first guy, Mike?
Devin Lloyd, he is the one. He's the guy. He is the guy. Last year we talked about Milton Williams. I talked about Trevon Merrick. I've been wrong a lot. Don't get me wrong. Uh, I actually saw a podcast come up recently, or on April 1st, I said I would be very surprised if they took a wide receiver in the first round, and we all know what happened there. I feel like I've got a much better feel for free agency, and so that's why I'm planting this flag for Devin Lloyd.
Mm.
Dynamic. He is 27 years old. He'll turn 28 during the season, so he fits into the 27 to 29 range coming off your first contract. He's got a first round pedigree. He's extremely athletic. This defense wants to get quicker. It wants to create more turnovers. Guess what? He had 5 interceptions last year. He is exponentially better in coverage than the two inside linebackers that they had playing last year. I don't think they're giving up on Trevin Wallace, but I do think that they want to upgrade over that spot. And Lloyd is a dynamic player. He comes from a similar market in Jacksonville. I don't know if they're going to be able to pay him. We've talked about winning on the margins with non-premium positions, paying top of market at non-premiums like safety and guard, so you can enhance the roster with significant talent, but you're not paying the price of a a top
DK Metcalf. Yeah. Yep.
yeah, a top tier edge rusher, a top tier wide receiver, whatever. Um, I think they need two inside linebackers to join Wallace, Claude the God, spelled GAWD. Charlie,
GAWD.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because we're not like blasphemous on the show. And Thomas Incoom, who is playing inside and outside linebacker. Um, sorry, excuse me, Van Martin Scott. I've got Thomas Incoom on the brain. I'm sorry. Strike that from the record. But what I would say is I think they have a good mix of young guys in there. I think Lloyd can be a massive difference maker.
Mm.
They haven't spent a lot at inside linebacker during Dan Morgan's tenure, and I just get the inkling he really wants to attack it. He said as much in Indianapolis. Who you got, Alex?
Okay, well, if you're gonna start with a linebacker, I will too. How do you feel about the name Caden Ellis out of Atlanta? 107 tackles last year, 1 forced fumble, 1 interception. Yes, the Panthers did cut up the Atlanta defense last year, but they had a lot of talent, and they actually did have pretty good numbers in the 2025 season. I think that if you're looking for someone who maybe not be the top of market guy like a Devin Lloyd, like you're saying, he is a good veteran presence, I think, who could fortify this defense and continue to help the Trevin Wallace train along. I have said, and I have written that the Panthers, it might be prudent of them to spend a first round draft pick on a linebacker, which is like kind of nuts considering the inside linebacker spot isn't traditionally considered a premium spot. And so if they do take either Devin Lloyd or Caden Ellis, that might change things, at least when it comes to their first round draft pick. But if they are going to go after a linebacker, I think you can't really go wrong with either of these two guys.
Yeah, and I would add to Caden, while he's a little bit older of a guy because he's already had his second contract. He's one of those guys that played through his rookie contract, then took like a short-term deal, and then wanted to get into free agency again. He's an alpha. He's a guy that blitzes extremely well, and that's something that Evero really likes to do, is blitz his inside linebacker. So I think that's a worthwhile fit for sure. My next guy, Cameron Curl from the Los Angeles Rams. Now, he did not play under Evero or Cooley while he was with the Rams. He's only been there for 2 years. Before that, he played for the Commanders. This is a guy who can play all three safety positions. He can play nickel corner. He can work in the box. He can play free safety. He can play cover 2. He can play cover 3. Like, they can use this guy all around the ball. He had a sensational year for the Rams last year. He can be a ball hawk. He is a really good run defender. I think he just makes a ton of sense. He's an excellent complement to Trevon Merrick. I believe they need to be better at the post safety position, and that's why I think he mixed with Merrick and Lathan Ransom makes a ton of sense. You can still re-sign Nick Scott if you want to be a core special teams player and a guy that you know that if there is an injury, he can settle in and do everything. But Cam Curl is a guy that I think makes a ton of sense. Who you got
Yeah.
for your number 2 guy?
No, that's fair. My number 2 guy, I'm gonna go on the offensive side of the ball, and I'm gonna go with center Connor McGovern. Now, between the two of us, you are the interior offensive lineman specialist. However, um, and you can definitely build on what I'm about to say, but McGovern was the starting center for the Buffalo Bills last year. He is kind of considered the second best center in free agency behind Tyler Linderbaum, who is just getting so many headlines. Like, I just love the fact that the center position is getting so many headlines heading into free agency. He's 28 years old. Obviously, the Panthers will probably need to figure something out at the starting center position because while Dan Morgan wasn't committal about Cade Mays over the NFL scouting combine, it would make sense for him to be as an undrafted free agent to go and kind of see his market. And if the Panthers cannot pay him, he'll probably find somewhere else to go. There have been questions on how much the Panthers have valued Cade over the years because, they drafted him and then let him go to a practice squad spot and then they brought him back.
Questions that I've brought up on, on a
Well, I
daily
mean, other
basis.
people have brought it up too. Hey, I was on a shout out Julian Council of the Locked On Panthers podcast. He brought this up to me and he listed a whole bunch of reasons why the Panthers didn't why the Panthers haven't valued Cade Mays. And then he
Oh,
asked,
I
so
see.
do you actually think they have? And I said, dude, you just answered your own question. So okay, but
As Julian does.
that is that is just I think that it I think that Connor could be, and if they do, and here's the thing, if they do take Connor McGovern in free agency, if they do spend that money, then you kind of see that the writing's on the wall for Cade Mays as well, and that interior offensive line is kind of shored up for 2026. So that's why it would be compelling to me. Anything to add about Connor McGovern, Mike?
So I think what they'd have to pay him is the value of what they paid Cade Mays, Austin Corbett, and Brady Christensen put together. And I
Mhm.
expect at least two of those guys to be gone this offseason. So there's logic there. I do think if they were to go after a center who wasn't in house, McGovern would be the most logical because they love versatility. He can play guard, he can play center. He is a bona fide player at both positions. And I think the concern with Cade Mays, well, he started 20 games at center. He's played over 2,000 snaps at the position. I don't know that they see him as a long-term fit for what they're trying to accomplish. He's got a very unique size and body template for the center position, more so like a pass blocking version of Bradley Bozeman, right? Like
Mm.
Bradley Bozeman as a run blocker was terrific. That's pretty much his game.
Yep.
Cade, I think, leaves a lot to be desired as far as getting down the field from a run blocking perspective. Now that said, I still think he's going to get paid pretty well. I think when you look at the Chargers, you look at the Ravens, who might not want to spend on Linderbaum with his market. He was just with the Giants. If they miss out on Linderbaum, that could be a thing. You look at Miami, Tennessee, who just cut Lloyd Cushenberry. Like there are going to be so many options. And from what I understand, he's a guy that really likes being in the South. So I think the Titans, which is nearby, where he grew up, that could make sense.
Mhm.
Um, the Panthers are doing a ton of work on offensive and defensive line, and that was the constant discussion that was brought up behind the scenes in league circles. Um, we also have to remember that right now they have the third highest offensive line payroll in the league. So are you really going to invest that much on McGovern?
Right.
When you have like a 17.5 or an $18 million now, since the cap's been set, an $18 million price tag on Ike Ekwonu, and you don't even know when he's going to play, as much as they've put on a brave face about it. So yeah, that's what I have to add.
No, that's really great. That's really great stuff. Do you have an offensive guy? Or are you going free?
No, you're spending on defense this offseason if you're Mike Kaye, GM extraordinaire. Uh, we've brought him up. I've talked about him since December. He's been the number one guy on my list as far as guys that I think make a ton of sense. I think Devin Lloyd's the priority and should be the priority. But if I look at this pass rush and I say to myself, Trey Hendrickson's probably aging out, not necessarily a great fit midway through his career to move back. They move back in coverage. Um, he's in his 30s. Do I really want to drop him in coverage that much? Do I really want to change up the scheme where he's had so much success? Can I afford a trade for Max Crosby? I don't know. I love
Mm.
my draft picks if I'm this team's philosophy, thinking that wise. I think they need a bunch of fireballs to throw at teams. They clearly have a lot of trust in Pat Jones, even though he didn't play last year. Nick Scorton's going to be a star in this league, in my opinion, as we've documented a million times. Princely Uman Milan's a great, not a great, but like can be a very good rotational pass rusher. I think they need to add another weak side rotational pass rusher and then a guy who can start and play effectively, and that's Joseph Osai from the Cincinnati Bengals. Massive fan of his. I think he fits the dynamic. He's only 25. His injury history is very early in his career, and that's over and done with. He's been pretty durable ever since. And I think he's a guy who's got a lot of upside, can work opposite the strengths of Nick Gordon, can be used in a rotation, can play on third down when they move Pat Jones inside. He's another guy that you give kind of that 2 year, 3 year prove it deal where he makes like 3 years, 24 million with 16 million guaranteed. And that's not an expensive price to pay for a pass rusher, especially one who's ascending. He signs a deal where he can test free agency again, similar to Caden Ellis, while he's still in his prime. I think that works out for everybody. It also doesn't negate you from spending a first round pick or a second round pick on a pass rusher. I mean, Joseph Osai just gives you so much flexibility and options. And I think that's something that the Panthers are very big on, especially as they try to take this patient approach and build year to year.
I don't wanna put you on the spot here, but can you compare and contrast? I think people would be interested in this. Could you compare and contrast DJ Wanham and Joseph Osai? Obviously, Wanham is a free agent this year as well.
So what I think is interesting about the Wanham Osai comparison is they both in their with their first team rushed opposite an all pro pass rusher.
Mhm.
Um Wanham had success opposite Daniil Hunter, and then Trey Hendrickson was on the opposite side of Osai. Wanham's numbers look prettier. Osai's probably a little bit more versatile, better run defender, um, probably a little bit more athletic. Hasn't dropped in coverage a lot, just like Trey Hendrickson, but he's also in his mid 20s and can learn. Wanham was coming off a major injury. There was no way for them to expect a blood clot and all the stuff that went down. Um, I think from Osai's standpoint, he's largely healthy, did deal with some like soft tissue things, I believe, this year, but for the most part, he's been fine. Again, he's in his mid 20s and he's already played 5 years. Like, I think that that's a healthy mixture of youth but experience. And again, he doesn't have to be the be all end all. Unless you have a top five edge rusher, you want a strong rotation. You want to be able to do multiple things. And what I would say too is how long is Avero going to be here, right? Like, could he
Right.
get a head coaching job next year? Could it all bomb and he's not around? Osai has the athleticism to play with his hand in the dirt or play in space. I think the versatility's there. And you're not like investing in scheme. I think you can't. Something that's come up in my conversations of late, just things that I've mused to other people, is like if you're only focused on scheme fits, you're not focused on football players. And like
Mhm.
this team wants football players.
Mhm.
So I think he makes a lot of sense, especially if you don't want to pay the price for a Hendrickson or Bradley Chubb, who I honestly don't think is a slam dunk. His injury history, the fact that they traded away in Denver, I mean, I think that was more circumstantial, but like I think Chubb is a guy that fits so much like Harold Landry, and if they weren't interested in Harold Landry, why would they be interested in Bradley Chubb? Now that
Mhm.
doesn't mean they won't sign him, but I mean, if maybe they learn from it because Landry had a pretty good year last year in New England. Who's your third guy?
Just to punctuate the Osai discussion, he suffered a right shin injury
Mm.
late last season, and then he also had an ankle injury, but pretty much outside of that, he's been really quite durable, throughout his career, so good points made all around. My final guy, and we don't have to spend too much time on this, is Rashad White, running back. He's most recently coming from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's worked with Dave Canales in the past. Well, I guess in that 1 year when Dave Canales was the offensive coordinator and play caller in Tampa Bay. That was by far Rashad White's best year, by the way, was when Dave was there. Last year, 572 yards, 4 touchdowns. You could probably get him on a similarly cheap deal that the Panthers got Rico Dowdle on last year. Then again, it probably have to be incentive laden, and the Panthers will probably just not expect the same sort of production that Rico Dowdle achieved in 2025 because they ended up paying Rico quite a bit of money actually with all the incentives that he achieved. But I think just with his explosiveness, his ability to be versatile and receive the ball out of the backfield, obviously the running back position is like a really violent one. I don't think that there's a problem with having four guys, particularly if one of them is going to take a heavy role on special teams. They feel really good about Trevor Etienne. The Panthers, you can make the argument they don't really know what they have in Jonathan Brooks because of the fact that he missed all of 2025. As I've said on this podcast and other podcasts and in my writings, very much a Jonathan Brooks guy over here. But if you want that extra insurance at the running back spot, I think Rachaad White would be a safe place to be. Um, Anything else you want to, before we move on to our next segment, Mike, anything you want to punctuate this segment with?
Yeah, to Alex's point, I wrote about taking the Rico Dowdle approach in free agency. Rachaad
Mhm.
White was one of the options. I would check that out if you want to have more of a discussion. If you're like on the fence about Rico, or you really want Rico re-signed and want some kind of logic as to why they wouldn't bring him back at a huge price, or also if you want to see the type of options they could potentially have with this stacked running back class and just kind of seemingly grows as we're on here right now. And now there are reports that David Montgomery got traded from the Lions to the Texans as we talk about running backs.
Oh.
So I think a lot of teams are going to avoid spending heavily on that position once those top like 3 or 4 guys are off the board. According to Adam Schefter, it was a 5th round pick. So like,
Mm.
well, depending on where you're at from a cap perspective, you're going to wheel and deal. But speaking of not wanting to spend, Alex, I know you've got the host baton, but I felt like this was the perfect segue. Let's talk about the position the team shouldn't spend on.
Mhm.
Who do you have? Like, what's the position you're like, I don't, I mean, does it make sense to spend here?
So I know how people might feel about this when I say this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Defensive line. The Panthers already have a top 2 defensive line when it comes to payroll in the league. Uh, Earlier this week, the Observer confirmed that the Panthers have allowed or have told Ashawn Robinson that it's cool if they have the Panthers' permission to seek a trade.
Was it, is that a quote? Like, hey, it's cool. Just go try to find your
Well, yeah, no, I was a little while I was saying it, I was a little too cavalier with that, language, but essentially, the Panthers have messaged to Ashawn Robinson that if you want to, seek a trade for yourself, go for it, and what that means is that, they are going to try to it seems like what that signals is they're gonna try to free up cap space along this defensive line. If Robinson is cut or released pre-June 1, the Panthers saved 10.5 million against the salary cap. Robinson has been a really productive player for the Panthers, but in this final year, his cap hit is just a little too high. They also already spent a lot of money in last free agency in Turk Wharton, who struggled with injuries at times in 2025. They also spent a lot of money on this guy, Bobby Brown. And Bobby showed a lot of promise, particularly at the end of the season when he got some starting reps. So I think if there's one position in free agency to not go after, it would be the defensive line. And obviously there's some really, really obvious ones. But one that straddles the line between obvious and um, you know, not, I think it's defensive line. Like, does my rationale make sense, or are you looking at this number and being like, well, they still really could improve, on run stopping? Alex, that's like not a prudent thing to do. Where are you sitting at with all this?
No, I agree. I think if you're cutting Ashawn to open up $10.5 million, and then you're going to go replace him with somebody who you hope is going to be as productive for equal or lesser value, I think that's not just necessarily the right move. Maybe it means you got to enter the draft. I think they have some options that they like. Um, in Cam Jackson, they did sign Jared Harrison Hunt off the practice squad because they were worried about being poached by an AFC team. I've reported that a couple of times. They have young guys to develop in there. They obviously want to see Wharton used properly and probably avoid it, see what he can do without injury. I think Bobby Brown can step up. Um, but I will say this, and I'll add to this since we're not going to talk about it very much, is the reason why you would allow a player like that to seek a trade is because if he were cut, he would not see anywhere near that money on the free agency market. At least if you get traded, you can negotiate against that and maybe rework a deal to where it's more favorable for you. Ashawn doesn't have any more guaranteed money left. He's got I believe an $8.5 million base salary with another $2 million in incentives. That's why it's 10.5. But when you're looking at his, maybe he can negotiate against it and say, look, the incentives don't matter to me. I'll take $8 million, or maybe it's he takes 6 million. They rip up the contract. He takes 6 million, and then they add the 2 million to his already easy to reach incentives. So I think they're doing right by him in that mode, because if they cut him, he's probably going to get $4 or $5 million on the free agent market at most. So that's kind of where that stands for me. And I've kind of gone back and forth on this because now that Kyle Pitts is franchise tagged, I feel like spending on tight end is really problematic. And I was a guy who was like very big on adding Cade Otton. I think Cade Otton's market is going to explode now because he's going to be the guy in free agency. Like you could look at guys like Austin Hooper who's aging, or like David Njoku who's aging. I just don't think that kind of fits the puzzle there. If you're going to take a move tight end like Njoku, I would just draft one. And Thursday, I'll have a mock draft coming out, and you'll see kind of how I prioritize that position. I think if you were going to add to this offense from the standpoint of like deep threats or like big play guys, it would be wide receiver, because that this team has already shown they value that position. I brought up Wan'Dale Robinson multiple times. I'm less inclined to think that they're going to spend a wide receiver this year, but I do feel like they like what they have there. And so I would say tight end is a position I don't know if they want to spend at. That said, Tommy Tremble can open up $6 million if you release him. I'm under the impression, based on all my conversations in Indy and before, that they are going to keep him.
Mm.
That said, his contract becomes guaranteed on March 13th, which is 2 days after free agency begins and 4 days after the negotiating period ends. In theory, they could agree to terms with somebody like Cade Otton and then cut Tremble to open up the space to sign him. I don't think they're going to do that, but it is a possibility, because once that contract becomes guaranteed, you ain't saving a dime.
Mm-hmm.
And so, unless you do a post June 1 thing after the draft, which I don't think they would do, to me, this is more about trying to upgrade and compete with JT Sanders than it is about moving on from Tommy Tremble, who basically, you signed him and then he had a career year. I mean, the bar was low, but he had a career year in receptions and receiving yards. You asked him to do what he did, and he did it. If you valued him, he's also the one guy who can play literally every phase, and you don't need to worry about him. They really like Mitchell Evans. I could see them, they went really heavy on wide receiver last year. I could see them going 5 wide receivers and 4 tight ends this season. So, and the conversations that I've had, they're really looking into the draft class. So we will see how that goes, but tight end would be the position I'd probably avoid spending on.
That's very fair. Who should they re-sign? So let's talk about this, and this will wrap up our show. Who are the guys that you think, or let's go one each,
Before free agency, right? Like,
before free agency, before the new league year begins? I'll go first because mine's obvious, and if you're a listener of the show, you might already know who I'm going to say, and I'm going to say Jalen Coker. This is pretty on the nose stuff. Jalen Coker is an exclusive rights free agent right now. The Panthers would just be smart to sign him to a multi-year deal. I actually think they know that as well. They would love nothing more than to sign him and tie him down to a 3-year deal, a 4-year deal, something that would keep him in Carolina for a long time. Whether that is something that Jalen and his representatives would want is, that's still to be seen, not because he doesn't love Carolina, but because, wide receiver markets are really up and down, and you want to be able to capitalize when you have a really great year, which Jalen has proven in flashes that he could have. But there are questions about his durability. He has struggled with injuries, just candidly, the past couple of years. But um, if you're looking for the future of this passing offense, it is Tedero McMillan and Jalen Coker. I think the team still really values Xavier Legette and his potential, but at the end of 2025, when you needed a first down, you found the ball to you threw the ball to Jalen Coker. So that's the guy I think the Panthers should re-sign before free agency begins. Mike, who do you have?
Yeah, and I would add to that, based on my conversations, I'm not under the impression either side is in a rush. They understand what the situation is. I mean, they can only negotiate with each other, right? Like, so, I think from the agent perspective, if I'm an agent, I'm waiting for the wide receiver market to kind of set itself. If Wan'Dale Robinson goes out and gets a big deal, or somebody else gets a big deal, and then you have a template for this year. Uh, and then if you're the Panthers, your leverage is, hey, here's a 1-year minimum deal, or take what we want from an extension. So I think like they need to let that stuff play out. I agree with you. They need to resign. I mean, they're going to, like, that's
They have to, yeah.
but like, I guess my pushback would be like, you don't necessarily need to sign him before the gates open. That said, during the negotiating period when teams are agreeing with wide receivers, then things can move quickly, right? And then you get, maybe it's like what Adam Thielen got his rework contract the day free agency opened, because he saw the market and how everything kind of came together. The guy I would sign is Josh Nijman, because frankly, you want to have you want to have the least amount of turbulence possible going into free agency, and he just seems like, to me, the guy you probably want to start the first month of the season at left tackle. If you don't want to spend a ton of money and you're not clear on what Icky's timeline is, which they've been very positive, but not giving us a timeline. Part of me thinks that that's posturing, because the draft is coming up, and I think they're going to be in play for a first round offensive tackle, and what people know, and you know what I mean? So I think Nyman makes sense. I think he's more of a better fit for right tackle, but he's a guy that I think if you sign to a 2-year deal, even if it's at a premium for a swing tackle, can give you depth for a couple of years. Obviously, Taylor Moton's up after 2027. Ikwanu's up after this year. So depending on how he plays, you're going to need a swing tackle anyway. And if you sign Nyman and then draft a guy early, you can let the guy that you drafted early develop, and eventually he can be your cost-effective left tackle of the future for the next few years, which I think, whether it's Bryce Young at quarterback or somebody else, you need that. And I think uh, an early guy that I really like, just from an athleticism standpoint, kind of reminds me a little bit of Lane Johnson from Charleston, South Carolina. Monroe Freeling, Georgia, is a guy that I'm colored intrigued by. But yeah, so I would say Nyman is the guy. Like, Dan Morgan basically said he's going to let the entire free agency class test the market. To me, the urgent guy would be Nyman, just because of the situation you're in with Iquanu. This is not a good offensive tackle class. It almost never is, because good offensive tackles typically don't hit the market. Rasheed Walker is like the only starting level guy. Everybody else is a Nyman like swing tackle. And I can tell you that he is very well liked behind the scenes, very well liked by a lot of different departments. And I think Nyman is a guy who knows the blocking scheme. He's got a familiarity with Joe Gilbert. I just think he's a great teammate. He handles everything well. Has he had some poor performances? Absolutely. But I also think his positive performances have been highlight worthy. And I think there have been games where he has helped them win. So Nyman would be my guy.
Yeah. Is free agency can you rank your favorite days on the calendar when it comes to free agency versus uh the draft versus week 1? Like I feel like free agency is a big deal. Like I feel like, or to you specifically, Mike, I feel like free agency is one of your favorite times of the year, just based on how much you know and how the conversations that I've been a part of at the scouting combine. Like, you know your stuff. You love this time.
Well, I think roster building is fascinating, right? And
Yeah.
I think from my perspective, when you're in Philly, you have to kind of know everything because Howie Roseman does so many unique things. You have to understand the cap, you have to understand roster dynamics, you have to understand roster building, you have to understand depth charts, you have to understand numbers, and you also have to understand, how all of that plays together. And I find that fascinating. I mean, I love both. Like, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I also came into the business as a draft writer, so I do really enjoy the draft. I really enjoy free agency. I've covered some really bad teams, and when you're looking for hope for the future, typically free agency and the draft are the way to go.
Right.
Um, I have a lot of respect for the way the front office handles itself, specifically this one and the one in Philadelphia. And I kind of like putting together the pieces and like figuring out the why of everything. I know we talk about the why with the draft of guys, but my why is trying to figure out things and learn. And I feel like if you're in this business and you're not learning every day, you're doing it wrong. And I find learning about new players very interesting. I find learning about different cap mechanisms very interesting. I love cap structure. I'm a nerd with that stuff. Um, I spend a lot of time on it, and I hope the audience benefits from it. Either that, or they're just listening to a lot of noise.
They do. They do.
But what I would say is make sure you sign up for the Access Panthers newsletter. It's free, comes to your inbox every Monday. We will have updates, exclusive analysis, exclusive news, rumblings, commentary, etc. throughout the off season. That's not going away. It comes every single Monday during the off season. So if you are a Samax sicko or just a regular, well established, well balanced human being, you can enjoy some coverage on us, sent straight to your inbox. Also, make sure you're subscribing to charlotteobserver.com. We've got a mock draft coming out Thursday. We've got some really cool analysis down the pike. We'll have a live blog throughout free agency's first week that Alex and I curate. The Hornets are doing really well, and Rod Boon's absolutely killing it from a coverage perspective. Scott Fowler as well. We got a lot coming your way over the next couple of months, and we are not going to stop.
Hey, the ACC tournament is going to be in Charlotte, guys.
Same week as free agency, so double your pleasure, double your fun. Double and come. But yeah, this offseason is a huge one for the Panthers. The next few weeks are huge ones for the Hornets. You and I have both been moonlighting as the B reporters on the Hornets. Got some great content for you on the website regarding Charles Lee and Dave Canales' relationship, which I thought was pretty cool, that I got on the off chance that they were both in Indianapolis at the same time. But yeah, make sure you're following along with us because we are not taking our foot off the gas. I truly believe that we cover the offseason better than everybody else. And yeah, we'll have some fun together.
Well, couldn't have said it better myself, but I'm going to try right now. Thanks, as always, for listening to our pontifications on all things Panthers with Mike Kaye and myself and our wonderful producer, Emily Broyles. Please subscribe and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts by searching Processing Blue. And if you watch us on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to get notified whenever new episodes drop. And finally, please be sure to stick to charlotteobserver.com for all of your Panthers needs. Mike, stay humble, stay creative, and keep processing.
That's a wrap.